So have you ever been like listening to a track and suddenly the beat just sounds like your speakers are completely malfunctioning, like the audio file itself is just corrupted or skipping?
Tearing apart at the seams, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Tearing apart. Yet somehow, instead of reaching for the skip button, that absolute digital chaos just makes you want to nod your head even harder.
Right. It is a highly specific and honestly totally counterintuitive feeling. I mean, your brain registers a catastrophic error, but your physical body registers a groove.
And that tension right there between digital malfunction and this deep physical rhythm, that is the exact puzzle we're exploring today. We are taking a deep dive into an absolutely fascinating column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR.
Yeah, the piece is titled Glitch Hop, the low-frequency culture formed by fragmented beats.
Exactly. And our mission for you today is to explore how producers took the steady, reliable groove of traditional hip hop, smashed it into microscopic digital pieces, and then painstakingly glued it all back together.
And in doing so, they engineer a genre that physically and intellectually commands your attention. I mean, this isn't passive listening at all.
No, definitely not.
It's basically an aggressive hijacking of your sensory expectations.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, the MMR column makes a really crucial distinction. Glitch hop isn't just like a lazy portmanteau of the words glitch and hip hop.
Right. It's not just throwing a stutter plugin over a beat.
Yeah, it's not just an effect on a rap instrumental. It is an entirely new production philosophy built from the ground up on deconstruction.
And to really grasp the magnitude of that philosophy, we have to contextualize the era the source focuses on.
Mm,
So we're looking at the late 1990s and early 2000s.
okay.
Before this period, electronic hip-hop production was largely constrained by the physical limits of hardware samplers.
Like the MPCs and stuff.
Exactly. You found a break on a vinyl record, you chopped it across the pads, and you triggered it. The workflow was inherently linear and very performance-based.
But wait, I mean, avant-garde artists in the IDM scene, guys like Aphex Twin or Autechre, they were doing incredibly complex, glitchy, nonlinear audio manipulation way before this, right? Why is the MMR text treating this specific era of glitch hop as such a massive leap?
Well, what's fascinating here is the collision of two previously isolated worlds. And this was all facilitated by a sudden explosion in DAW capabilities and computer CPU power.
Ah, right, the tech caught up.
Exactly. You had the highly intellectual, mathematically complex, and often entirely undanceable glitch processing of the IDM world. But suddenly, software allowed for real-time, non-linear time, and pitch warping without totally crashing your computer.
Which is a big deal.
A huge deal. So producers could take those academic techniques and basically force them to carry a heavy physical, dance floor-ready hip-hop pocket. They democratized the glitch, taking it out of the art gallery and dropping it right in the club.
And that transition from the gallery to the club brings us directly to the actual architecture of the groove. Because if you just smash an audio file into a million microscopic fragments, you usually just end up with white noise.
Just static, yeah.
Right, and you can't dance to noise. So how did they organize that chaos into something with actual swagger? The column points out that an absolute sweet spot for glitch hop tempo is tightly clustered between 85 and 110 BPM.
Yeah, that specific pocket is basically non-negotiable for the genre to even function.
Which is wild to me. My initial thought reading that was, well, if you were making hyperkinetic futuristic glitch music, wouldn't you want a much faster tempo?
Like drum and bass territory.
Yeah, like up at 170. Why anchor all this chaotic energy down to 90?
Well, it actually comes down to the literal physics of sound waves in a three-dimensional space.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So at 85 to 110, you naturally lock into that half-time feel of classic hip-hop, which provides that essential head-nodding bounce.
Yeah.
But more crucially, you are managing sonic real estate.
Sonic real estate? I like that.
Right. Low frequencies, like your massive sub-basses, they have incredibly long physical wavelengths. They literally take milliseconds to physically develop and push the air in a room to hit your chest.
So if the tempo is too fast, the bass waves essentially trip over themselves before they can fully form.
Exactly. Fast tempos leaves no room for the decay of a heavy sub. It just turns into a muddy, continuous hum.
That makes so much sense.
The 85 to 110 pocket provides the precise amount of physical time between the quarter notes to maximize the sheer weight of the low end. It allows the bass to breathe and fully resolve before the next hit.
So that creates a foundation that feels immovable. It balances a rigid mechanical grid with a human, slightly dragging swing.
Right.
But over top of that heavy foundation, the column details how things get completely unhinged. The kick drum and the snare drum, which are the core of the beat, they stay relatively simple and anchoring.
Very steady.
Yeah, but the hi-hats, the clicks, all the transients, they are hyper-fragmented. The producers are slicing them into 30-second notes, or even smaller, microscopic fractions of a second.
They are essentially taking a magnifying glass to the negative space between the kicks and snares.
Right, so think about it like driving on the highway. The kick and the snare are the steady, humming engine of your car. They are relentlessly reliable, pushing you forward at a constant, predictable speed.
Okay, how about you?
But those micro-edited hi-hats and glitches, they are like looking out the passenger window at the scenery flying by, and someone keeps hitting fast forward, then slow motion, then fast forward again.
That is a perfect analogy.
You get this bizarre, intoxicating sensory illusion of profound stillness and violent acceleration happening to your body simultaneously.
That driving visualization perfectly captures the psychoacoustic effect here. Human perception is incredibly easy to manipulate if you provide a stable reference point.
Right, the engine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you have that rock-solid anchor, your brain feels safe. It always knows where the one is. And due to that baseline safety, the producer can completely scramble the high-frequency information, the scenery, and instead of inducing vertigo, it induces exhilaration.
But there is a massive danger there, right? I mean, if you are constantly scrambling the high frequencies, chopping audio into 64th notes, and just stuffing the stereo field with relentless digital
It
stutters,
sounds exhausting.
it seems like you would instantly overwhelm the listener's ear.
You totally would. And that is where the structural discipline of the genre really separates the amateurs from the pioneers. Glitch hop avoids ear fatigue by mastering the power of the unplayed note.
The unplayed note. Yeah, the MMR text breaks down how these producers handle a standard 8-bar loop to solve that exact problem.
Right, they don't just redline the glitch effects for the entire duration.
Exactly. The first 4 bars of the loop are dedicated almost entirely to setting up the basic groove. They establish the physical expectations, teaching your brain the rules of the rhythm. And then only in the last 4 bars do they introduce the intense hyper-edits, the stutters, and the rhythmic tearing.
Basically, they meticulously build a pattern for the sole purpose of systematically destroying it.
But reading the text, I stumbled on something that feels entirely contradictory to me. It states that a critical element of this final 4-bar glitch section is the intentional omission of sound. They actively insert silence.
Yes, dead air.
So what does this all mean? How does taking sounds away make a beat hit harder? Because my instinct, if I want a track to be heavy, is to stack layers, put distortion on it, add a crash cymbal, layer 3 kick drums.
Oh, absolutely, that's the common assumption. But it's an exercise in tension and release, really manipulating the way our brains acclimate to stimuli.
Okay.
If a track is a constant, unrelenting wall of sound, your auditory system quickly adapts. It normalizes the volume, and it essentially becomes background noise no matter how objectively loud the meters say.
Oh, right. It just all blends together.
Exactly. By deliberately inserting total silence or chopping a sound so abruptly that it leaves an unnatural vacuum, the producer pulls the floor out from under your expectations.
So you just fall into the gap. Your brain is anticipating a snare or maybe sustained bass note, and instead it gets a black hole.
Yeah. For a split second, your brain panics. It actively searches for the missing frequency, and that search creates immense psychological tension.
Wow.
And then, a fraction of a second later, the inevitable, massive low-end impact drops back in. Because your ear was just starving in total silence, that returning bass feels exponentially heavier.
That is brilliant.
It hits you with twice the physical force it would have if there had been a constant wash of noise leading up to it. So the weight isn't created by the volume of the bass, it's created by the contrast of the silence.
They are literally weaponizing the vacuum. And to exert that level of psychological control requires zooming in even closer. I mean, we talked about an 8-bar macro structure, but the MMR column goes deep into what happens inside a single individual bar of music.
Yeah, down to the actual millisecond.
Honestly, they are engineering this stuff to an insane degree. Let's look at the very first beat of a measure. The 1.
The anchor.
Right. In normal dance music, you expect the punchy kick drum and the deep sub bass to trigger at the exact same millisecond to create a massive boom.
Sure.
But the text points out that glitch hop producers will frequently take the sub bass layer and delay it by just a few milliseconds behind the kick drum.
Right, not enough to sound rhythmically offbeat.
No, but enough to separate the physical impacts. And then on the second and fourth beats where the snare drum hits, here's where it gets really interesting. A traditional snare drum has an initial smack, which is the transient attack, and then a lingering echo, the tail.
Standard drum acoustics.
Exactly. But the text reveals that in glitch hop, producers will often use two entirely different audio samples for those two parts of a single snare hit.
They are entirely decoupling the physics of how a real instrument resonates.
It's like casting two different actors to play the exact same character in a martial arts movie.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Yeah, you hire an elite fighter purely to throw the punch. That's your sharp, aggressive, synthesized transient attack.
Right.
And then the literal millisecond the punch lands, you dynamically swap them out for a dramatic actor who is hired purely to give an agonizing, echoing reaction shot.
The tail.
That's your separate, lingering acoustic tail sample. By splitting the snare, they get absolute independent control over the punch and the aftermath.
And that philosophy of absolute control extends to how they manage the entire frequency spectrum. The column breaks down how they dissect the lows, mids, and highs.
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you realize they're solving complex mixing problems during the composition phase, rather than trying to fix them later with EQ. In the low frequencies, they treat the bass as an impulsive short burst rather than a sustained note.
Which prevents the track from bloating into that continuous muddy hum you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Then, in the mid-range frequencies, they focus almost entirely on short, sharp transients to keep the complex rhythm completely readable.
Okay, so punchy mids. What about the highs?
In the high frequencies, instead of a constant wash of hi-hats or white noise, they use extremely sharp occasional insertions. They drop a high-frequency sound in and instantly mute it using an aggressive volume envelope.
So they just cut it off entirely.
Yes. What you realize is that glitch hop creates depth not by slathering everything in reverb, which just smears sounds together, but by obsessively manipulating the attack, decay, sustain, and release of every single element.
So conceptually, this micromanagement makes a ton of sense. But how is a human being physically executing this? To ground these theories, the column transitions into looking at the actual architects of this sound.
The pioneers who made it happen.
Right. Let's talk about the glitch mob. They are highlighted as laying down a foundational blueprint for the genre's engineering.
Yeah, they established a lot of the structural non-negotiables for taking this sound into a live setting.
The source notes, they used a team approach to divide the immense labor between writing the beat and executing the sound design. But a key takeaway from their blueprint is their treatment of the sub-bass.
Oh, this is crucial.
They let the bass drive the entire track, avoiding simple, repetitive loops. But crucially, they kept their sub-bass strictly in mono. Now, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
We have incredible panning tools, right? Producers love making tracks sound huge and wide. Why would they intentionally restrict the lowest, most powerful part of the track to a single central channel? Doesn't that inherently make the mix sound smaller?
I mean, it seems counterintuitive if you're mixing for headphones, but it's a vital engineering choice for the physical architecture of an actual nightclub.
Oh, because of the speakers.
Yeah. If you make a sub-bass wide, meaning the low-frequency sound waves are slightly different in the left and right channels, those massive, slow sound waves will eventually cross paths in the open air of a club. And when the peak of a wave from the left speaker meets the trough of a wave from the right speaker, they literally cancel each other out in the air.
Phase cancellation. The bass just disappears depending on where you are standing on the dance floor.
Precisely. It just vanishes. So by forcing the sub-bass into strict mono, playing the exact same identical signal out of every speaker simultaneously, the glitch mob ensured that no matter where you were standing in the room, that low end would hit you square in the chest with total, uncompromising stability.
They sacrificed stereo width for physical reliability.
Exactly.
They are literally engineering the audio file to survive the physics of a concrete room. But if the glitch mob built the foundational architecture, the column suggests that producers like Koei Sound came in and obsessively engineered every single microscopic grain of wood in the floorboards.
Oh, KON sound represents an almost terrifying level of precision.
The text mentions a specific rule they seem to follow, which is that the exact same envelope or filter setting is almost never used twice on a sound.
It's unbelievable.
Meaning, if a synthesizer growls on beat 1 and growls again on beat 3, it is not a copy-paste. The texture, the cutoff frequency, the shape of the distortion has been slightly altered. Again, how is someone actually doing that across a 5-minute track without losing their mind?
Through an excruciating process called microautomation.
Micro-automation.
Yeah. In traditional production, you might draw an automation curve in your software to slowly sweep a filter open over an entire 8-bar chorus,
Right, slow buildup.
like a broad sweeping stroke. In Glitch Hop, they are automating parameters by the millisecond. They are manually drawing complex geometric shapes for an LFO to follow over the course of a tenth of a second.
That sounds exhausting.
It really is. They're telling the computer for exactly 50 milliseconds, twist the distortion knob to 80%, pan the sound 30 degrees to the left, pitch it up a semitone, and then instantly snap every single parameter back to zero.
It's literally programming music, pixel by pixel. And the source highlights how Keonian Sound utilizes this automation to strictly separate their frequencies.
Which is the secret to their clarity.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a dozen different shaped wooden blocks into a single glass jar. If you just throw them all in, they jam up against each other. There's no room.
They clash.
Exactly. But Keonian Sound is essentially taking a laser and shaving the edges off every single block down to the millimeter so they slide perfectly past each other without touching.
That's exactly what they're doing with EQ.
Right. They carve out highly specific sonic real estate for the bass, the mids, and the highs, automating the EQ so they never, ever overlap.
Which is why, even when the rhythm becomes unbelievably complex, fragmented, and fast, it remains crystal clear. The frequencies aren't fighting for the same space.
Well, all this microscopic carving brings up a massive conflict with the rest of the music industry at the time. We really need to examine how this deeply nerdy, highly technical genre navigated a concept called the loudness war.
Oh yeah, this is a crucial piece of audio history. For a long time, there was an arms race during the mastering phase, which is the final polish of a track before release, to make every song as perceived loud as physically possible.
Right, you would aggressively use limiters and compressors. If we use a physical landscape metaphor, it's like taking a mountain range, which has high peaks and deep, quiet valleys, and just chopping the peaks off and filling in the valleys to make it a flat plateau.
Just a solid block of audio.
Yeah, the whole track is just constantly, uniformly screaming at you.
And that aggressive compression fundamentally destroys dynamic range. But as the MMR text points out, glitch hop producers actively refused to participate in the loudness wars.
They totally ignored it. They didn't care if their track was the loudest file in a DJ's playlist. And based on everything we've discussed about tension and release, it makes perfect sense why they'd reject it.
It would ruin the core mechanism of the genre because glitch hop relies entirely on the dynamic contrast between extreme, heavy peaks and sudden, absolute silence.
Right, if you compress it.
Overcompressing the track would raise the noise floor. It would amplify the background hiss and the quiet tails of the reverb. You would destroy the very vacuums and gaps that give the bass its psychological weight.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Entirely. The artistry, the physical impact of glitch hop is entirely finalized in the mixing phase. You cannot boost it in mastering without suffocating the physical effect.
So they protected their transients at all costs. And that uncompromising methodology had a massive butterfly effect on modern music.
It really did.
The column traces a very clear timeline here. By 2013, this hyper-detailed, dynamic sound was absolutely dominating electronic music festivals. But by 2015, these exact techniques had bled completely out of the underground and infected the mainstream.
The DNA of glitch hop is basically unavoidable today.
It is. The expert analysis in the text points out that when we turn on the radio, the production we hear in modern trap and heavy bass music and even in top 40 pop owes a massive debt to this era.
Oh, 100%.
Those hyper-fragmented hi-hats that roll and stutter in a trap beat, or the intense microscopic vocal chops and sudden dropouts in a pop song, those are the direct descendants of the glitch hop methodology.
Yeah, what began as an avant-garde technical exercise fundamentally rewrote the standard for what a modern commercial beat is actually supposed to feel like.
Which perfectly synthesizes our key takeaways for you today. Glitch hop, as the MMR column makes abundantly clear, was not just a brief passing trend of glitchy noises.
Not at all.
It was a rigorous technical exercise that essentially argued that timbre, the actual microscopic texture and quality of a sound wave, could be just as important, if not more important, than traditional melody.
It proved that dissecting a beat down to the millisecond, splitting a snare into an attack and a tail, or starving the brain with a fraction of a second of silence could drastically alter the listener's physical and psychological state.
Yeah. It was an evolution of human sensory perception, entirely driven by the capabilities of software. Okay. So, here is our call to action for you. The next time you put on a new trap beat or a modern pop track, don't just listen to the lyrics or hum the main melody.
Really listen to it.
Yeah, really listen to the invisible architecture of the beat. Listen for the intentional silences. Pay attention to the micro edits and the high frequencies, and notice the distinct carved out separation of the heavy bass from the kick drum.
It's all there.
Once you start listening for the architecture, you will hear the ghosts of glitch hop in almost everything.
This raises an important question, though.
Okay, what's that?
If music producers, armed with just a DAW and an understanding of psychoacoustics, can so heavily manipulate our physical bodies, our sense of anticipation, and our emotional tension just by editing audio down to the millisecond,
Oh, I see exactly where you're going with this.
how else might the microscopic pacing of the digital media we consume every day be affecting us? Right. If 50 milliseconds of silence before a bass drop can trick our brains into a state of physical tension, how are the hyper-edited videos, the algorithmic feeds, and the constant digital stutters of our daily screens secretly hacking our broader perceptions of time, tension, and release?
That is intense. It makes you wonder who is actually controlling the tempo of your feed. Are you enjoying the scenery, or are you just being psychologically manipulated by the micro edits? Something to chew on the next time your speakers sound like they're malfunctioning, but you just can't stop nodding your head.